Before we begin, let yourself settle. Find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders soften and let them drop away from your ears. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands rest wherever they are open and easy. There is nothing you need to do for the next hour but rest. You don't have to remember any of this. You don't have to follow every word or hold on to every detail. If your attention drifts, that's all right. If you fall asleep before the end, that's more than all right. That is exactly what this is for. Just let the story move around you like warm water and let it carry you gently down towards sleep. We are going to travel a very long way tonight. 66 million years into the past. And then from there into a world that never was. A world that might have been if a single morning had unfolded just a little differently. It will be a slow journey. There is no need to hurry. We have all the time in the world and more. So let your eyes close if they aren't already. Let your breathing slow just a little. And let's begin. 66 million years ago, on an ordinary spring morning, the world was quiet. Mist lay low over a wide prairie of ferns pooling in the hollows, drifting slowly between the trees. The air was warm, even in these early hours, and heavy with the smell of green and growing things, the smell of damp earth, the smell of the slow brown rivers that wound through the lowlands, carrying silt down from distant hills toward a sea that no longer exists. The sky was just beginning to lighten at its edges, a soft gray brightening slowly toward gold. The stars were fading one by one. Somewhere far off, water moved over stones, a sound so gentle and so constant that it seemed less like a sound and more like the breathing of the land itself. Along the tree line at the edge of the open ground, a herd of great animals slept. They were Triceratops. Dozens of them gathered close together in the cool of the morning. Their huge bodies rose and fell with the slow, deep rhythm of sleep, and the mist gathered and thinned above them with each breath. Their three-horned heads rested against the soft ground. Their great bony frills, broad as doorways, lay tilted at rest. And tucked in among them, sheltered on every side by the warm bulk of the adults, lay the young. One of them was still very small. She had been born only a season before in the warm heart of the herd, and she had never known anything but this. Her horns were little more than gentle bumps upon her brow. Her frill was soft and short, not yet grown into the great shield it would one day become. She slept nearest the center of the herd where it was warmest, where the slow breathing of the older ones surrounded her on every side like the sound of distant waves rolling in and rolling out, in and out, endless and calm. She was dreaming, perhaps, in whatever way such a creature dreams. Small movements passed through her from time to time, a twitch of a foot, a soft sound low in her throat. And then she would settle again, deeper into sleep, safe inside the living wall of her family. It was in every way an unremarkable morning. It was the kind of morning that had come and gone millions upon millions of times before, across the long ages of the earth. The kind of morning that would come and go millions of times again. There was nothing about it to mark it as special, nothing to suggest that this particular dawn of all the countless dawns that had ever broken over this warm green world might be the most important morning in the entire history of life. But far above, something was moving through the dark. High beyond the clouds, high beyond the pale brightening sky, beyond the last fading stars, there was a point of light. It was not a star. It did not belong there, and it was growing very slowly, very steadily brighter. It had traveled for millions of years to reach this place. It had drifted through the cold and utter silence of deep space, tumbling slowly end over end along a path shaped by forces no living creature would ever understand. The distant pull of great planets, the faint nudge of passing comets, the slow, patient wobble of its own turning. None of that long history mattered anymore. What mattered was that it was here, and what mattered was where it was going. It was a mountain of rock and iron. 10 kilometers wide, larger than many mountains that stand upon the earth today. and it was falling silently toward a warm and sleeping world. In our own history, this is the moment everything ended. In our own history, that mountain in the sky came down. It struck the shallow seas of what we now call the Yucatan with the force of 100 million of the most powerful weapons ever built. It sent fire across whole continents and threw a veil of dust and ash into the sky and plunged the world into a long, cold darkness that lasted for years. And when at last the darkness lifted, the great age of the dinosaurs was over. Nearly all of them were gone, erased in a single terrible chapter after a reign that had lasted 160 million years. That is what happened. That is our world, the world we know. But tonight, we are not telling that story. Tonight, we are following a different thread. A single small change in the great tapestry of what might be. Tonight, the mountain in the sky does not come down. For a few long moments, it seems as though the morning itself is holding its breath. The point of light grows brighter still. It swells in the pale sky, closer than anything has come in 100 million years, closer than anything will ever come again. For one strange hour, a second faint light hangs in the daytime sky, pale and cold beside the rising sun, close enough that a watching eye might see it move. And then the mountain in the sky passes by. It sweeps close, so close, and then it is past. Carried onward by the same silent momentum that brought it across the void, it curves around the edge of the world and away. Out past the moon, out into the dark, dwindling slowly, growing smaller and fainter until at last it is nothing at all. A single grain of rock and iron lost again in the vastness, tumbling on towards some other star, some other morning, some other time. Below the herd slept on. The small Triceratops never woke. She never stirred. She never knew how near the world had come to ending in the quiet sky above her sleeping family. None of them knew, not one animal in all that warm green world ever knew how close it came, or that anything at all had happened. The mist thinned. The sun climbed higher, warm and gold, burning away the last of the morning gray. Somewhere in the forest, a bird-like call rang out across the trees, high and strange, and after a moment, another answered it from the far side of the clearing. Insects began to hum in the warming air. The rivers ran on toward the sea, and slowly the herd began to stir. The great bodies shifted, heads lifted from the ground. The oldest and largest rose first, groaning softly as they came to their feet, and then the others followed, one by one, until the whole herd stood in the golden light of the ordinary morning. The small Triceratops rose too, unsteady and blinking, and pressed close against her mother's leg, and after a moment the two of them lowered their heads together to feed among the ferns. The morning simply continued, and this is the story of the world that kept going. The world where the great reptiles were never swept away. The world where the doors that opened for us in our history stayed forever closed. The world that unfolded slowly and quietly across the millions upon millions of years that followed, into a present that never was and never could be, and yet tonight in the warm dark behind your closing eyes so easily might have been. Let's walk into it together. There is no hurry. We have all the time there is. To understand the world that might have been, we first have to understand the world that truly existed. Because much of what follows is not invented at all. It is built upon the real Earth of the late Cretaceous, a planet both deeply familiar and profoundly strange. It was a warmer world than ours, far warmer. There were no great sheets of ice at the poles. None at all. Instead, forests grew in places where, in our own time, there is nothing but ice and rock and endless cold. Green forests reached toward the far south, in lands that now lie buried beneath the frozen weight of Antarctica. In the far north, above what would one day be called the Arctic Circle, crocodiles, or creatures very much like them, basked in warm and slow-moving rivers in a land of long summer days. The whole planet was wrapped in a gentle greenhouse warmth. The air itself was different. It held far more carbon dioxide than the air we breathe today, perhaps several times as much. And this thick, warm blanket held the sun's heat close and kept the world mild from pole to pole. From one end of the earth to the other, it was green. The continents themselves were in the wrong places. They had been drifting for hundreds of millions of years, slowly, endlessly, at about the speed that your fingernails grow, and they had not yet arrived at the shapes we would recognize on any modern map. Shallow seas cut clean across the middle of continents, dividing them in two. Lands that are now dry and far apart were joined together. Lands that are now joined were separated by warm and shallow water. The world was familiar, and yet it was not our world. It was a rough draft of it, an earlier version still being written. And into almost every corner of this warm, green, unfinished world, life had poured itself in the endless and astonishing forms of the dinosaurs. They were not the sluggish, swamp-bound monsters of the oldest imaginings. Not the slow, dull, tail-dragging creatures of old pictures. They were fast and alert and astonishingly varied. Some were smaller than a chicken, darting through the underbrush on quick and delicate feet. Some were larger than a passenger aircraft, moving across the land like slow-living mountains. Many of them wore feathers or something very like them. Soft coverings that had first appeared long ago, not for flight at all, but for warmth and for display, and only much later, in some lucky lineages, for the miracle of flight. For over 160 million years this had been their world, longer than we can truly imagine. If you were to walk backward through all of human history, through every empire and every age, all the way to the very first of our kind, and then keep walking back 1,000 times as far, you would still not reach the beginning of the age of dinosaurs. They were not a brief chapter. They were the great long body of the book, and we are only the smallest note at its very end. Let us return now to our herd, and to the small Triceratops sleeping and waking and feeding at its heart. By day she moved through a landscape that stretched wider than she could ever see the end of. Her herd walked slowly across the floodplain, unhurried, cropping the low plants with beaks like great curved shears, grinding the tough vegetation with rows upon rows of teeth built to last a lifetime and to be replaced endlessly as they wore away. When she was frightened, she pressed close against the larger ones and felt the warmth of them and was safe. When she was calm, she wandered a little further, testing the edges of her small world with the boldness of the very young, always keeping the herd within sight, always ready to run back to it. The adults around her were enormous. Some were as long as a bus, and heavier than any animal that walks the earth today. Their heads were crowned with horns longer than a grown man is tall, sharp and pale and dangerous. Their broad frills rose behind their skulls like shields, or like the spread of great fans, and in the low light of morning and evening they caught the sun and glowed with warmth and color. Together, gathered close the herd, was a moving fortress, a wall of muscle and bone and horn that few predators in all the world would ever dare to challenge. But there was one predator that dared almost anything. At the edge of the forest, in the deep green shade beneath the trees, something watched the herd, still and silent and patient. It was a Tyrannosaurus, and it is worth pausing here for a long, quiet moment to truly see this animal as it was, because it was nothing at all like the clumsy, upright, tail-dragging monster of the oldest pictures. It was something far stranger and far more terrible and, in its own way, far more beautiful. It stood balanced and low, its long spine held level to the ground, its massive head reaching forward, its great heavy tail stretched out behind to hold it all in perfect balance. It was 12 meters long from the tip of its snout to the tip of its tail. It weighed as much as a large elephant, and yet it could move with a speed that seems impossible for so vast a creature. Its skull alone was longer than a person is tall. And within that skull was a set of teeth unlike any other predator that has ever lived. Not thin blades for slicing, but thick, blunt, banana-sized spikes, rooted deep, built to bite down through hate and muscle and bone alike, and to crush whatever they closed upon. Its eyes face forward, both of them looking the same way, so that it could judge distance with great and deadly precision. Its sense of smell was extraordinary, far beyond anything we possess, able to catch the faint scent of a wounded or a dying animal from many kilometers away, carried on the wind. And along its neck and down its back, it may well have carried a coat of coarse hair like feathers, dark and bristling, so that it looked less like a great-scaled lizard and more like some enormous, dreadful, flightless bird. This morning it was not hunting. It had fed well the day before, and its great belly was full, and so it merely stood in the shade at the forest's edge, watching the herd with the slow, unhurried, patient attention of an animal that has learned that time is on its side. It would eat again. But not today. Today it only watched. And the small Triceratops did not notice it at all. She was busy with a patch of soft new growth at the edge of the trees, tender and green and good, and the world to her was simple and warm and safe. She did not know that she lived in the shadow of the greatest land predator the earth had ever produced. She did not know anything of danger, or of time, or of the long ages behind her and ahead. She only knew the taste of the new ferns and the warmth of the sun and the nearness of her mother. And that was all the world she needed. This was the world as it was. And now, so slowly that no living creature could ever feel it, the world began change. In our own history, the change came in a single day. Fire from the sky, a year of darkness, a sudden, violent, catastrophic ending that swept away the great reptiles almost overnight and left the world empty and cold and waiting to be filled again by whatever survived. But in this world, there was no such day. The mountain in the sky had passed and drifted away into the dark and been forgotten before it was ever known. And so the change, when it came to this world, came the way that nearly all true change comes. Not as a catastrophe, not as a single terrible chapter, but as something so slow and so gradual and so gentle that no single creature in all the world could ever perceive that it was happening at all. The continents kept drifting. Slowly, endlessly, at the speed of growing fingernails they moved. And as they moved, they reshaped the pathways of the great ocean currents, the vast rivers of warm and cold water that flow forever through the seas. And as the currents shifted, they reshaped the weather, and the weather across hundreds of thousands of years, across millions of years, began very gently, very patiently, to cool. It was not something the small Triceratops would ever feel. It happened far, far too slowly for that. Across the whole of her long life, the world would seem utterly unchanged. The summers warm, the winters mild, the ferns green, the rivers full. She would grow. That was the change she would know. Her horns would lengthen and harden and grow sharp and pale and strong. Her soft, short frill would broaden year by year into the great bony shield of a full-grown adult. Her body would swell with muscle and mass until she stood among the largest of the herd, no longer sheltered at the warm center, but standing now on the outer edge, one of the great walls that sheltered the young. And one day, in the fullness of her time, she would have young of her own. Small and soft-horned and unsteady on new legs, sleeping at the warm center of the herd, exactly as she once had, surrounded by the slow breathing of their family, like the sound of distant waves. She would watch over them. She would grow old. And in time, as all things do, she would come to the end of her long life and lie down for the last time in the warm green world she had always known. A world that to her had never changed at all. But her granddaughters and their granddaughters after them would live in a world just slightly cooler than hers, and their granddaughters cooler still. The winters in the higher latitudes, far to the north and far to the south, would grow just a little longer with each passing age. The warm forests near the poles would begin, across unimaginable stretches of time, to thin and to falter, and slowly, slowly to retreat toward the warmer middle of the world. And the animals would answer. This is the quiet engine of everything that follows. Hold on to it gently as you drift. Not death, not disaster, but change. The slow, endless, patient pressure of a shifting world, pressing on every living thing, generation after generation after generation, asking always the same quiet question that it has asked since life began. Can you adapt? Can you change as I am changing? Can you become something new? Or will you be left behind? And the dinosaurs, given the one thing that our own history denied them. Given time, would go on answering that question as they had already answered it for over 100 million years. They were not fragile creatures, we must remember that. They had already survived the slow breaking apart of whole continents. They had endured the rising and the falling of the seas, the coming and going of long, warm ages and cooler ones, the endless slow turning of the world. They were among the most successful, most enduring, most adaptable animals that the earth has ever produced. Given time, there was almost nothing they could not become. And now in this world they had all the time there was. Far to the south, many generations after our sleeping herd, in an age our small Triceratops would never see, a group of her distant descendants stood at the edge of familiar ground. Ahead of them, the land rose gently toward a frontier that had once been warm and was now in the deepest heart of each year touched by a cold that their ancestors had never known. A thin frost in the coldest nights, a sharpness in the wind, nothing that could harm them, but something new, something that had not been there in the days of the ferns and the warm, slow rivers. Behind them lay the crowded lowlands they had always called home. Good land, familiar land, but growing crowded now generation by generation with more mouths than the ground could easily feed. For a long while, the herd only stood at the edge of the rising ground. The wind moved slowly through the ferns, the light went gold and low and long as the sun sank toward the far hills. And the animals waited, as animals do for no reason they could name. And then, slowly, the herd began to walk toward the cold. They did not know they were the beginning of anything. They did not know they were taking the first step of a journey that would last for tens of millions of years and remake their kind entirely. They only knew that the grazing was better beyond the ridge where fewer herds had ever wandered, that the crowding was less, that the young were hungry and the land ahead was open and empty and waiting. They walked because animals walk. Because the world ahead was wide, and something in them, older than thought, turned always toward the open road. But in that first, slow migration toward the cooling frontier, the long story of what the dinosaurs would become had quietly, invisibly, and forever begun. Let the millions of years flow past now like water, and let us follow and see where the road leads. We are moving now far beyond the world of our sleeping herd. So far beyond it that the world itself would be almost unrecognizable. The continents have drifted into new arrangements, new shapes, new shores. The gentle greenhouse warmth that once wrapped the whole planet from pole to pole has faded slowly across ages beyond counting. The poles have cooled. Ice has begun to gather, thin and seasonal at first, in the highest and coldest places. And in this cooler, sharper, more demanding world, a strange advantage has begun to matter more than it ever did before: warmth, and the cleverness to make the most of it. Among the great and endless variety of the dinosaurs, there was a certain family of small hunters, slender and quick and sharp-eyed, light on their feet and quick in their minds. In our own imagination, we sometimes call creatures like these raptors. They had always been clever as animals go, and they had always worn feathers, soft, warm coats that held the heat of their swift bodies close against the cold. In a warm world, these things were pleasant but not essential. In a cooling world, they became everything. The ones with the warmest coats survived the longer, harder winters, while others failed. The ones with the sharpest minds found food when food grew scarce, remembered where the good hunting had been in seasons past, learned the habits and the movements of their prey, and outlasted those who could not. And the ones that hunted together, that shared what each of them knew, that cooperated and watched over one another and guarded one another's young, did best of all. Far better than any lone hunter, however strong, could ever do alone. Generation by generation across spans of time so vast that the mind can barely hold them. The slow pressure of the cold and the steady reward of cleverness worked upon these small hunters and shaped them. Their coats grew thicker and warmer and denser. Their bodies grew better at holding their heat, and their brains, most remarkably of all, grew larger, more folded, more complex. Their senses grew keener, their memories grew longer, their social lives grew richer and deeper, until a pack was no longer merely a group of animals that happened to hunt near one another, but something far more. Something more like a community, bound together by habit and by memory and by something that was not so very far away from trust. Come down now softly, gently into a single winter night, tens of millions of years into this changed and cooling world. Snow is falling, not the killing snow of a frozen and lifeless wasteland. Not a blizzard, not a storm. Just the slow, quiet, patient snow of a cold northern forest at the deep heart of the year. It falls without a sound. It settles softly on the branches of tall and unfamiliar trees. It gathers on the still dark ground, and it settles flake by flake on the feathered backs of a pack of hunters moving quietly through the dark beneath the trees. There are perhaps a dozen of them. They are the size of large wolves, but they do not move like wolves. They move on two legs, upright and light, and utterly silent, their long tails held straight out behind them for balance, their heads low and forward and still. Their bodies are covered in dense, dark, layered feathers, patterned in shadow and pale to vanish against the winter forest, so that even here, even close, they are difficult to see. Their breath rises from them in soft, slow clouds of steam and drifts away and is gone. They are hunting. But there is no hurry in them at all, no frenzy, no rush. They move as one single thing, spreading apart and drawing close again, without a sound, each of them, somehow always aware of exactly where all the others are. Now and then, one of them makes a low sound, barely more than a breath shaped in the throat, and the others hear it and answer it, and the whole shape of the pack shifts and flows in response, like a single mind spread across a dozen bodies. Beyond the trees in a clearing, a herd of larger plant-eaters has bedded down for the night, dark shapes against the snow, unaware. The hunters have found them, and now the hunters will wait. They will not rush in. They understand, in whatever way their minds understand things, that patience is the oldest and the sharpest tool they own. They will watch. They will circle slowly. They will choose their moment with care, and the night is long, and they are in no hurry at all. And here in the falling snow on this quiet and ancient night we come to the strangest and the most wonderful question in all of this imagined world. Because a mind like this, a mind that plans and waits and remembers, a mind that cooperates and communicates and shares what it knows, is a mind that has already begun a very long journey. And we know from our own history, our own strange and unlikely story, where that kind of journey can sometimes lead. Not always, perhaps not even often. Perhaps it is the rarest thing in all the universe. But sometimes, somewhere among these clever, patient, feathered hunters across the countless generations still to come, might there one day arise a lineage that goes further still. A creature whose mind reaches past mere cleverness into something more. One that does not only use what the cold world provides, but begins in small ways at first to shape it. One that picks up a fallen branch or a sharp-edged stone and sees in it not just a branch or a stone, but a tool, a thing that could be used, a possibility. One that gathers with its kind around the warmth of a shared shelter and passes down its knowledge not only in its blood, but in its teaching. One that looks up on a clear, cold night at the very same stars that shine down upon you now and feels for the very first time in all the long history of its kind the faint and dizzying stirring of wonder. We do not know. We cannot know. It is a question whispered softly into the dark, and the dark does not answer, and perhaps it never will. But it is a gentle thing to hold as you drift down toward sleep. The thought of a warm and feathered mind sitting quietly in the falling snow beneath the wheeling stars tens of millions of years ago, in a world that never was, on the very edge of becoming something for which we have no name at all. For now, though, the pack simply hunts. The snow simply falls, soft and slow and endless. The larger animals sleep on in the clearing, and the hunters wait among the trees, patient as the winter itself. And the night is very old and very deep and very calm, and nothing needs to happen for a long, long while. Let it be still. Let the snow keep falling, and let us move on gently through the deepening age of ice. Time flows on, and the slow cooling of the world does not stop. It deepens. The long, gradual retreat of the ancient warmth becomes at last a true and lasting age of ice. Great white sheets gather at the poles, thick and heavy and vast, and creep slowly outward year upon year, age upon age. Winter in the highlands of the far north and the far south becomes a season not of a few cool weeks, but of long, dark months. And the world divides itself into a warm green band around its middle, and a great cold white north, and a great cold white south, where the ice lies deep, and the wind never rests. And here surely we might expect the giants to fail. The huge plant-eaters, the long-necked wanderers, the great horned herds, the enormous bodies that had always relied upon a warm and generous and easy world. Surely we might think the coming of the ice would be too much for such creatures. Surely the giants of all things could not survive an age of frost and snow. But life, we must remember, is far more inventive than that, far more stubborn, far more full of surprises. The giants did not vanish. The giants changed. Picture now a wide plain at the very edge of the ice, tens of millions of years further on. It is a cold, clear, brilliant day. The sky is a pale and endless and cloudless blue, the blue of deep winter, so bright it seems almost to ring. The ground is hard and frozen underfoot, dusted with fine dry snow, and scattered across it are the tough, low, hardy plants that have learned over long ages to survive the frost and the cold and the long, dark months, and to green again when the brief cold summer returns. And across this frozen plain, slowly, steadily moves a herd of enormous animals. They are the far-distant descendants of creatures very much like our small sleeping Triceratops, but they have been reshaped utterly by 100 generations and more of cold. Their great bodies are covered now in long, shaggy, layered coats, coarse feathers and hair-like fibers grown thick and dense as the wool of a mammoth, hanging almost to the frozen ground, swaying as they walk. Their broad frills have grown even broader and heavier, held up to catch the low, pale winter sun, and warm the blood that flows in great vessels just beneath the skin. Their horns are massive and scarred, and worn smooth at the tips from a lifetime of sweeping the snow aside to reach the frozen plants beneath. They move slowly across the hard, bright ground, and the breath rises from them in great white clouds, streaming away on the wind. A whole herd of living hills wrapped in fur and steam, walking patiently through a world of ice. And the young walk at the very center, just as they always have, sheltered from the cutting wind by the vast, warm bodies of the old. It is the same shape, the same ancient pattern, the same warm, sheltering wall of family that surrounded a small, soft-horned calf sleeping among the ferns in a warm, green morning so unthinkably long ago. The world has changed almost beyond all recognition. Almost everything is different. But the herd endures, the herd goes on, and at the very front of this great herd, leading them all across the frozen plain, walks an old female. She is the largest of them, and by far the oldest. Her long, shaggy coat has gone pale and silver with the years. Her great horns are cracked and yellowed and worn. Her broad frill bears the scars of a long life. She moves slowly and with care, for her old bones ache in the cold, but she moves with certainty, because she knows the way. She has walked this migration many times. Many long winters, across the frozen plain, over the low rise ahead, and down at last into the sheltered valleys beyond, where the wind cannot reach, and where the herd waits out the deepest and darkest heart of the cold. She knows every step of it. She remembers what the young ones have not yet learned, and so they follow her. The whole vast family follows the old one, because she carries within her the memory of the way, and the memory of survival, passed down and lived and remembered across a long, long life. She is very old now. This may well be her last crossing, and in a way that we can never truly know, but that perhaps in the quiet of this hour we can almost feel she carries within her far more than the memory of the road. She carries the whole unbroken thread of everything that came before. The warm spring morning under the ferns, the great herd sleeping in the mist, the mountain in the sky that passed silent and unknowing and drifted away into the dark, the small soft-horned calf at the warm center of it all, the first slow migration toward the cooling frontier, the long, patient, endless changing of the world age upon age, all of it, every step, every generation, all of it has flowed unbroken from that sleeping calf in that warm, lost morning, down through all the ages of ice and change, to this one old giant leading her family home across the snow. The line was never broken, not once. Through all of it, life simply continued and passed itself on and endured, and here it is. Here she is. She pauses now at the crest of the low rise. Behind her, the herd slows and gathers close and waits. And before her, at last, the valley opens, sheltered, still, out of the wind, promising warmth and rest and safety through the long, dark heart of winter. For a long, quiet moment, she simply stands there. An ancient animal silver with age against a pale and endless winter sky. The steam rises slowly from her great flanks. The snow settles softly, flake by flake, upon the broad, worn shield of her frill. And she looks down with old and patient eyes into the sheltered valley below where her family will rest. Then slowly she lowers her great and ancient head, and she begins the long walk down, and her descendants, her whole vast family, the young and the old, come down out of the wind behind her, down the long slope into the quiet, sheltered valley, out of the cold to rest. The line goes on. It always has. It always will. And what in all of this of us? In this world we were never entirely absent, not exactly. Our own distant ancestors were there, as indeed they truly were all through the long age of the dinosaurs. Small, soft-furred creatures no larger than a mouse or a rat, or at the very most a badger. They crept through the underbrush in the dark. They hunted insects among the roots and the fallen leaves. They kept to the edges and the shadows and the safe small hours of the night, living quietly in the vast world of the giants, waiting for a chance that in this world would never come. Because in this world, the great reptiles never left. In our own history, the death of the dinosaurs threw the doors of the whole world wide open. All the great roles that the dinosaurs had filled, all the ways of living that they had held for 160 million years, were suddenly terribly emptied. And into that vast emptiness our small furred ancestors walked. And they grew, and they spread, and they became, across the ages that followed, the great and varied family of the mammals, and at the very last, after so long, they became us. We are the children of that open door. But here in this world, the door never opened. The dinosaurs never left. The great roles were never emptied, and so the small furred creatures stayed small. They stayed in the underbrush. They stayed in the shadows and the safe dark hours, hunting their insects, raising their tiny young generation after generation for tens of millions of years, and they never rose. They never inherited the earth. There was no room. The world was full, which means that in this world, this whole, long, wondrous, imagined world of feathered minds and woolly giants and ice-crossed plains and warm, lost mornings, there is no one at all to name any of it. No one digs up the bones from the frozen ground. No one gives the animals names, or sorts them into families, or draws their pictures, or wonders where they came from. No one stands beneath the wheeling stars on a cold, clear night and asks how it all began, or how it might have been different. No one lies awake in the dark and imagines other worlds. The whole vast and beautiful pageant of life simply unfolds, age upon age, with no mind anywhere to record it, no eye to marvel at it, no voice in all the turning world to tell its story. No one at all, except perhaps tonight. Except perhaps you, here now in the warm dark, drifting slowly towards sleep, holding this whole lost world gently in your mind and giving it for just a little while a place to be. So let us hold both worlds together softly just for one last moment before we let them go. In our world, our real world, you are lying in the dark at the end of your long day, letting yourself rest at last, and far above you, beyond the ceiling and the roof and the drifting clouds, the same stars are turning slowly through the night as they always have and always will. And in that other world, the one that never was, the one we have walked through together tonight, the very same night is falling. The very same stars are wheeling slowly overhead, the same vast, patient, ancient dance of the cosmos that does not know and does not care what walks or sleeps beneath it. The same pale moon is rising over frozen plains and warm, dark forests and quiet, sheltered valleys. And somewhere in that other world, something is sleeping too. Some distant descendant of the dinosaurs, curled quietly in its nest, feathers soft against the cold. Or standing at rest, half dreaming, watching over its sleeping herd in the shelter of a still and snow-lit valley. Or floating slow and easy in the deep, dark waters of some ancient sea. Its eyes are closed, its great breathing is slowing, and its mind, whatever kind of mind it has, is dimming softly, gently toward rest. Two worlds, two timelines, two long, unbroken threads of life reaching back across 66 million years to a single warm spring morning and a single point of light in the sky that came and passed and made all the difference in the world. And the same quiet night, falling gently now over both of them. The dinosaurs never asked why they existed. They never wondered about the mountain in the sky that might have ended them or the strange and endless history that might have followed if it had. They never knew how near it came on that ordinary morning so long ago. They never knew anything of asteroids or of extinction or of the worlds that might have been. They simply lived. They walked through their warm mornings and their cold, clear nights. They raised their young at the warm center of the herd. They crossed their plains and sheltered in their valleys and endured through all the long ages whatever the changing world asked of them. They simply lived. In that world, the morning simply continued, and so will yours tomorrow. But not yet. Not for a good long while yet. There is no morning to worry about now. There is nothing at all that you need to do, and nowhere at all that you need to be. For now there is only this. The dark and the quiet and the slow, endless turning of the stars overhead. The herd is sleeping in the warm mist of the ferns. The snow is falling soft and silent on the feathered backs of the patient hunters beneath the trees. And the old silver giant rests at last in her sheltered valley out of the wind, her whole vast family gathered close and safe around her, her breathing slow, her great eyes closed. Everything, everywhere, across all the worlds that are and all the worlds that might have been is settling gently down into rest. So let your breathing slow. Let the story fade. Let go of the giants and the snow and the far-turning stars. Let go of the morning that never ended and the world that simply kept going. There is nothing left to hold on to now. There is nothing left to do. Let yourself sink slowly, softly down into the warm and quiet dark. Down to where 66 million years mean nothing at all. Down to where there is only this one gentle night and the deep, slow rhythm of your own breathing and rest. Sleep now. Sleep well. The world that kept going will still be here, waiting quietly in your dreams.